Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Alto, Tenor, and Baritone saxophonist, along with flutist, Hendrickson-Smith. These days, he is a part of the house band with Roots for The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and remains quite busy from his base in New York City. Over the course of our interview, he talks about his actual roots that began in New Orleans and the dreams he had of a career in music, along with reflecting on many years playing out of a suitcase, along with what is possibly in store for the future, along with some surprises. So please dig it, my friends. Thank you for taking a little time out for me tonight.
Yeah, of course. It was my pleasure.
Let me go ahead and get started real quick here. Let me just ask, what has been going on with you lately?
Well, my primary job these days is on the Tonight Show, so that's takes up, it's a full-time job. It takes up Monday through Friday during the day. And then 6 months a year, I play with Lawson Harris at the Carlisle Hotel.
Yeah.
And that's a trio. Lawson plays piano and bass, piano and sings, and there's a bass player named Gianluca Renzi, Italian bass player. And we're playing American songbook stuff. So that's kind of my primary jazz gig right now.
Right on.
I was working with Dr. Lonnie Smith a bunch with that octet we had about a year ago. That ran for about 2 years. We made a record called In the Beginning.
Yeah.
But that, he's not booking the octet anymore. It's just financially, it doesn't really make much sense.
Right.
And beyond that, I run, a record label named Rondette Jazz.
Okay.
And we're brand new. So we started off with 9 re-releases, and we have 3 new releases that are just kind of wrapping up their radio campaign. So they've been out for about 3 months. And
do you like running your own label?
This is my second crack at it. I had a label in the 90s called K-Pasta Records.
Yeah.
I ran that one into the ground with my 2 partners. So I learned a lot from all the mistakes we made.
Yeah.
Running a label is very thankless, and also really fun.
Right.
If you do it the right way, our business model is such that I get to make the majority of the artistic choices.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy that. I've been doing graphics and mixing and mastering and web design and all that stuff for years, working with this guy named Corey Leeds. He runs on a jazz label called Cellar Live.
Yeah.
So I've been his designer for quite a while. I think I've done probably 60 or 70 records for him. So, it's a chance for me to get to do that, but without any, secondary opinions. It's just I just get to do my thing. So that end of it, I really enjoy, just the artistic freedom. But yeah, there's a lot of, it's a lot of tedious, dealing with social media and dealing with shipping and answering crazy emails from customers and stuff. But, as we get bigger, hopefully we'll be able to farm some of that stuff out.
Right on. The question I have about the Tonight Show is, jazz musicians tend to kind of float. There's a lot of gigs they get involved with. And when you get kind of into a gig like that where it's a regular, almost a 9-to-5 kind of a thing, so to speak, do you like that regularity, that kind of thing that you can rely on?
Well, it's all about where you're at in your life. I'm 41. I'm recently married. I'm at the point now where we're starting to think about, setting up a retirement and buying a house and all that kind of stuff. Stuff you don't think about in your 30s or your 20s when you're just touring and it's okay to be broke.
Yeah, sure.
So, this is a gig that came along at a perfect time in my life, where I need to make some money and be able to set some stuff aside and still have time at night to play other shows.
Sure.
So it's, in a lot of ways, it's a perfect job for me, man. It's tenuous because the show can end at any time. TV is very fickle.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it feels pretty solid right now. Jimmy's doing great and the ratings are good, and we'll just see how long it runs for.
Right.
But
absolutely.
Musically, I love playing with the Roots, and the guys are all great. And my horn section mate is Dave Guy, who I I spent 7 years on the road with Sharon Jones and the Damn King, so it's great to have him there. We're good. We've been good friends since he was a kid.
Right.
And it's cool. It's certainly not a jazz gig. It's R&B and rock and hip hop and everything else under the sky except for jazz. So I have to kind of look elsewhere to keep myself satisfied on that end.
Well, yeah, it's a departure from the days of Doc, that's for sure. So let me go back to your lineage and your life, to your beginnings of growing up in the very jazz-rich New Orleans. What was that like for you? Did you dig growing up in New Orleans?
Well, I lived there as a child. I was exposed to some jazz when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Certainly like music festivals and Mardi Gras and the marching bands and all that stuff, but I didn't really get into jazz until I was in high school, and we were living in Pennsylvania at that time.
Gotcha.
In the middle of nowhere in this town called State College, Pennsylvania, is where Penn State University is. In a town pretty much devoid of any kind of culture.
Yeah.
So, any exposure I had to jazz was just going to a record store and buying records and reading books and trying to find videos and that kind of stuff, Yeah. It wasn't until I moved to New York when I was 18 that I really got a full sense of what I was dealing with as far as, the level of the guys that I'd be working with and it's pretty deep when you actually get to meet, Junior Cook or Stanley Turrentine and George Coleman and those guys,
Without doubt.
Pretty heavy duty.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did the jazz light bulb go off for you? When was it like, this is what I want to do?
It's funny, I was a classical flutist first, so I had the great fortune, even in the middle of nowhere at State College, I had a great teacher named Diane Gold. And she had lived in New York for a bunch of years, and she was very open-minded. But she taught me, work ethic, and something by the time I was like 12, I was probably practicing 4 or 5 hours a day. But just classical literature, like it wasn't any jazz at all. And then she was actually the one that first kind of pushed me towards jazz. And she was, we were working on concertos, and this is kind of a little known fact, but in the Baroque era, if at the end of a concerto there's a cadenza, and the fact is written out, these days, but apparently back then the cadenza was a time to improvise. So like the classical musicians would improvise their cadenza based on the chordal structure of what had happened before, which is very similar to what jazz musicians do, Yeah. So she was kind of sending me on to that, and we were, learning about what that meant, and I took to it. And she was, so she basically said, well, if you like that, you should probably start listening to some jazz. And she gave me a stack of like 10 records, and the very first one I put on is probably still my favorite record to date, and it's a Cannonball Adderley record, which is actually really kind of a Miles Davis record, but it's called Something Else. Yeah. It's Art Blakey, Sam Jones, Hank Jones, Miles, and Cannonball. And it was, almost instantaneous. It was, it's like you said, it's like a light bulb thing. I heard that, and I heard Cannonball, and I was like, I got to do that, So I think within a couple of months, I had an alto, and I found a teacher in town, and sort of just kind of made my way through it as best I could with what I had access to. Yeah. I would go to Harrisburg sometimes to see, they would have a jazz festival occasionally, and the first real show I saw was a double bill. It was Stanley Turrentine Quartet and then the George Coleman Quartet. Yeah. And I think Stanley T had Billy Hart and a couple guys from D.C. with him. I can't remember their names. And George had Harold Mayburn and Billy Higgins. It might have been Ron Carter. I can't exactly remember. It was a long time ago. But that was certainly the convincing thing. I was like, I really want to do that. So at that point, I kind of started practicing saxophone more than flute. And by the time it was time to apply to colleges, I ended up just only applying to jazz programs.
Right on. So when you did get to the Manhattan School of Music, what do you remember about those years? What do you remember, what really sunk in from their teachings for your career in jazz?
Well, I mean, the school itself was cool. I mean, if I had to do over again, I probably would have done like a year or two and then dropped out. Because honestly, the degree itself has never, ever meant anything to my career. There's never been one instance where someone's been like, are you available for this job when you see your degree?
Right.
That's never come into play. But the networking factor, I mean, I still work with a lot of the guys that I went to school with, like namely Ryan Kaiser, Jeremy Manacia, Al Street, Charles Ruggiero. These are guys, guys that I'm still playing with, 23 years later. But the thing about the school was like kind of like an entrance, like a way to move here and have a 4-year leeway to not worry about paying bills. I mean, you're just in school, living off of student loans, So it was a way to get here.
Yeah.
But the real education was just being in the city and going to the clubs and hanging out with the cats. I mean, I had the amazing fortune of becoming Ryan Kaiser's roommate. You know who Ryan Kaiser is?
Yes, absolutely.
He's still probably one of my favorite trumpet players. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but we ended up being roommates for 9 years. And when I moved in with him, like I could barely play a bird solo.
Yeah.
And he was so far advanced, especially at that young age. And he's 1 year older than me, so I was 19, he was 20.
Yeah.
And just his record collection was huge, and the way he would practice was very enlightening. And guys, Clark Terry would stop by the crib, and
wow, Charlie
Hayden was. He was on such a high level that it just kind of like injected me into this next level of just how to hang and listen to jazz and what it just kind of shows you how to act.
Yeah.
So those were kind of the more formative elements of that time. Like when I first got here, was just being around the cats. Philip Harper from the Harper brothers and Art Blakey was definitely a prominent cat in our scene back then, and he was substantially older than us, so he had a lot of stories to tell, and would kind of pull our coattails if we were doing something wrong, and it's part of the way jazz is handed down is the older guys, the cool ones, the older guys will take the time and take you aside and tell you what's what,
I always like to call those older cats the Jazz Jedi Council, because you probably can't help but when you're around them by osmosis pick up not only their cool, but that wisdom they just ooze with.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you, at this point right now, it's probably safe to say that you're one of the more sought-after musicians in New York City. How did you get to that point?
Well, I don't know how true that is, honestly. I mean, I have my, it's funny, the jazz thing in New York is very cliquey. Yeah. So like you get into your various cliques that you run with, based primarily on like the style of jazz that you're into. If it's like, straight ahead or kind of more pushy, modern straight ahead, or if you're really old school bebop, or if you're avant-garde, or whatever label you want to put on it.
Yeah.
Those are the guys you tend to run with, and those are the calls you tend to get,
Yeah.
And I guess I've always steered towards like the more soulful, blues-based side of jazz music, and so those are the kind of calls that I tend to get, like the Dr. Lonnie Smith gig. But also guys around town kind of know me as a bit of a hustler, and like I'm a guy that can kind of get things done. Like if you need someone to do arrangements or organize something, or get a record mixed and get it looking right, and I know the right photographers to call, just because I've kind of been in the production side of making jazz records for a long time now.
Sure.
So those are just skills you kind of develop along the way.
Yeah.
but right now my primary gig is really the Tonight Show and then Lost in Harris.
Yeah.
I think people kind of assume that I'm unavailable right now, so the phone doesn't ring quite as much as it was before I got the Tonight Show gig.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy with what I have right now. I mean, it's almost too much as it is.
Yeah.
And I most of the time, I'd say like 98% of the year, I get to stay home, which is pretty unbelievable, man. Because basically, if you sign up to be a professional musician, like you're signing up to live out of a suitcase for a good chunk of the year.
Yeah.
Just being on the road is part of it, and I did that for a solid 10 years, like 9-10 months a year. So now I'm ready to speak in my own band.
Yeah. Well, so when you look back on your life, you look back on all those years where you were touring and you were constantly busy. Is there a period in your life where you think, God, there was so much creativity, so much output, so much going on? Is there a period that really sticks out in your head?
That's a good question. It's all a bit of a blur. I mean, it's funny. I was forced to look back. I'm just switching over to a new publishing administrator. So we're going through every record that I played on and trying to re-register everything with this new company. And I was like, damn, look at it's probably over 100 records that I played on, something like that. 10 as a leader and then 90 as a sideman or something like that.
Yeah.
All that time in the studio and all that time in airplanes and playing gigs, there's not really any one period that sticks out. Certainly there's bright spots, like the Al Green record I got to play on was a huge, meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
The first couple tours I did with Amy Winehouse were really different. That was the first really high level gig I had ever done. Yeah, it was every show was really really packed, and we're playing at the the Grammys and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but it's so a lot of my favorite gigs have just been my gigs as a leader in some crappy jazz club.
Yeah.
Those are some of my fondest memories are playing my own music, and sadly I don't get to do that enough these days, just because I'm in, like I told you earlier, I'm kind of in a zone where I'm in a different period in my life where I'm thinking about the future, not just what's right in front of my face. So I'm more kind of focused on what pays the bills right now.
Yeah.
So I'm not booking as many gigs as a leader as I would like, but just artistically speaking. But I mean, basically, if I'm going to do that, I'm basically paying to play, and it's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
So, doesn't make any sense right now. But I still try to do it when I can. I have a gig in 2 weeks, but it's not going to be a jazz gig. It's going to be kind of a party band. It's no matter what, I'm having fun, man. I have equal love for R&B as I do for jazz, but jazz, if you don't play it, it goes away. It's not like riding a bike. It's something you have to keep working at.
Right on. So you played with a lot of people throughout your career. I mean, your bio list: Rufus Wainwright, of course. You're playing with the Roots every day. Dr. Lonnie Smith. You're going all over the place. Mark Ronson. Is there anybody out there that you would really like to play with, whether it's in the jazz world or other genres? Is there someone you're like, man, I'd love to get on stage with that person?
That's another good question. My number one jazz artist that I've always wanted to play with is, almost since day one, was Dr. Lonnie Smith.
Yeah.
I've always been the hugest fan of his. So, bucket list wise, he was number one for sure.
Right on.
Etta Jones was always one of my favorites. I only got to play with her twice, but that was huge. Of anyone left alive, it's tough because most of them are saxophone players.
Yeah.
I love Lou Donaldson to death, and I love George Coleman to death. I would love to play with Harold Mayburn some more. We've done a few gigs where we were both sidemen.
Yeah.
The guys that I would really yeah, I would love to have played with Art Blakey or like Elvin Jones, but those guys are gone, sadly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who's left. It's like it's not even like on my radar right now. I mean, who is there that's working that I would even have the option to play with?
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really gotten slim just because of the reality of cats are getting old.
Yeah. Yeah. Mortality. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the greatest thing about waking up every day?
Folgers in your cup. I love to work, so for me every day is like the greatest day because I love playing saxophone and I love having steady work and steady income. I have a great wife, I have a great dog, I have a great apartment. Right now things are really rolling great. So I mean, I don't know. It's every day is kind of like, even if it's routine, it's never really routine. I mean, I'm going into 30 Rock every day and taping the Tonight Show, and always different. It's always fun, exciting, and there's always a lot of pressure. So you can never really get lazy on that job.
Yeah.
And then every time I go to play jazz, I'm terrified every time.
Yeah.
I take it very seriously, the lineage and the history and trying to stay aware of my contribution to that, hopefully to the art form, and trying to take that responsibility very seriously. So I mean, I'm not kidding. Like when I go to play jazz, I'm terrified on the way to the gig.
Wow.
I consider it a pretty serious responsibility. So I try to practice and I try to stay humble and just treat each gig like it could be the last one and try to have fun and entertain people. I mean, that's always been one of my biggest goals in life, was just to entertain people.
Yeah.
And not be one of those artists that, I know a lot, this is another conversation, but a lot of people are into the whole turning your back to the audience, and that Miles earned the right to do that, and that's great, and I applaud all those people, but that's not where I'm coming from. I want people to tap their toes and smile and dance and have fun. That's the kind of music that I want to be involved with.
Sure. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A musician.
Right on.
I didn't know what. Like I told you, I was a classical flutist. For me, it was, it's really funny. I was really into the Jim Henson movies. I'm a huge Jim Henson fan, like Muppets and otherwise.
Yeah.
And it was that movie, The Dark Crystal. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh yeah.
Actually, it's a kind of a dark movie, man. But
yeah.
And one of the characters, one of the good, the good versus evil, one of the good characters played this weird kind of two-layered flute thing.
Yeah.
And I was real little when that movie came out, but I remember being just incredibly fascinated with that. And I think it was that moment I was like, man, I want to do something that jams,
Yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
I certainly knew. I knew very young that that's something that I wanted to do forever.
Yeah, that was up your alley. The one thing I always like to ask musicians is, if you think back throughout your life, do you have a good story that comes to mind? Just a really good, whether it's jazz or music story, that's just like, man, this is a good one.
Well, I probably have 100 of them, but probably most of them are rated R or worse.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's jazz musicians are. I love jazz musicians more than most other types of musicians for a bunch of reasons. I mean, a you have to be a smart person to play that music.
Yeah,
because it goes by so quickly, and it takes so much work to get to the point where you can even swing your way out of a tree. It's like. So I love being around jazz musicians, and most of them have struggled and have been, pissed on and been homeless. So a lot of them are dark, So there's a dark, incredibly smart trod upon type of humor that goes with that music.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a black music, so it's like you have to appreciate black culture if you're into jazz music or R&B. It's like, there's so many stories. I'm just not sure which ones I could tell without getting myself in trouble.
Yeah. No, that's good. What you ended up doing with that is you ended up doing something I didn't think you were going to do, but you really gave a good synopsis of jazz musicians, and that's awesome. What I want to ask you next is, if we get together in 10 years from now, we get on the phone, I'm like, Ian, what's up? What's been going on? What do you think you're going to be happiest to tell me about?
Oh, well, probably my blossoming garden and, the 3 dogs and 2 goats we have. I mean, that's, because my wife and I ultimately, that's our goal is to be able to have, we want to have a crash pad in the city so I can continue to play jobs at night here. And obviously we're hoping that the Tonight Show job goes for a long time.
Yeah.
But we want to have a country house upstate somewhere with like a small farm and like a barn and that whole business. And I'm hoping that my record label will be much more substantial at that point. About 5 years ago, I started plans to open a jazz club in the city.
Yeah.
And through various reasons, obviously it's a very difficult thing to do in New York, or anywhere, but, it didn't pan out in the timing that I'd hoped, but that's something I still really want to do.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm not sure if I want to open it in the city or if it will be a 7-day-a-week thing, but I do want to have some sort of situation where I'm booking music on a regular basis in some sort of venue. Whatever that ends up being. Yeah, but yeah, those are my 3 main things. I mean, be alive and happy, have a house, still be playing, and have the label going, and have some sort of club.
Yeah, you got a dream, man. That's for sure.
Yeah, man, you gotta set your sights high and not be dark when you get knocked back. That's right. I look at it.
That's right, exactly. Ian, man, stay cool, man. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great, man. I appreciate you too, man. Thanks for getting in touch, man. Stay in touch.
Right on.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over America, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Ian for his time and quality music in both jazz and well beyond. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or you can always visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things neon jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.